Just imagine how valuable and interesting your life would be if you could hold an entire dictionary in your mind. Well, Anastasia Woolmer is a multi-time Australian memory champion, and she's my favorite kind of memory athlete because in her teaching of memory techniques, she focuses on the meaning part of memory, and memorizing a dictionary, including the page numbers, is one of her projects right now, and we're going to talk about the nitty-gritty that goes into a memory project like that. If you've ever seen Anastasia's TEDx Talk, you'll already know that she's an incredible speaker, and that's just one of the things that she helps other people achieve with her skills as a renowned memory coach here in Australia and the street cred to really back it up. And if you haven't seen her TEDx, I highly encourage it because it's very unique. And for those of you who happen to be in the region where I'm at in Australia, here's some very exciting news. Next week, Anastasia is giving a live training in the Brisbane area. You can find info at her website, which is anastasiawoolmer.com, and there's a longer link which I'll have below this video so you can sign up, and I really hope that you will check it out. But in general, if you're not in Australia, go check out her site anyway for her courses or her one-on-one training options. She has a great newsletter, and I really can't stress this enough. Anastasia won her first memory competition only after 5 months of training herself, and she not only won competitions, but she set several Australian memory records, and the real deal here is going that step further to have her passion for memory help make memory more meaningful for you. Now, there's a lot of good things in the interview you're about to hear, but she also let me workshop a little bit with her about a memory problem I was trying to solve that relates to memorizing a dictionary and having the page numbers of where words are in the dictionary. And even just being able to speak about this out loud was super valuable because that helps give meaning to sometimes memory issues that are actually pretty easy to solve, but you get stuck in your own head and you can't really mentally rotate it. And getting just a little bit of insight and feedback and discourse with someone who knows a lot about what you're trying to achieve, well, you even just speak differently when you know that the person you're talking to knows what you're talking about, and it really, really helps with insights. And the good news is that I've managed to make great progress since we had this conversation, and so we'll get into this, and I'll say a little bit more about it at the end of this interview because it's one of the ways that I make memory more meaningful for myself. It's kind of personal, but it used to be professional for me back in the day. In any case, it involves swans. So without further ado for now, let's join Anastasia for this insightful and empowering conversation about your lifelong journey with optimized memory and meaningful memory. Anastasia, thank you so much for joining me again on the Magnetic Memory Method podcast. I leapt at the opportunity to interview you again just because I saw you have an event coming up in Brisbane, and I thought it'd be really cool for people to know about that. But we'll also talk some shop for people that can't be there, like mnemonic strategies and your experiences, which are incredible with memory competition.
Absolutely. Thanks, Anthony. And thanks for having me on again. It's great to talk to you again. You're always such a wealth of interesting and diverse memory knowledge. So it's good to be here.
Well, hopefully my brain can hold up to that reputation, but thank you. Well, speaking of brains holding themselves up to their reputation, what have you been doing during these crazy times to protect your mind and especially your memory?
Well, I am one of these people who I like to take a really holistic look at health and memory health. And so I sort of see it as a complete picture in terms of, to just isolate memory and go, I'm just going to do memory training. Obviously that's great. And there's some really great strategies that everyone can employ to help them to learn faster and better. But really, what I like about memory techniques is that they do that thing where you can learn more faster and better. So really the best thing we can all do for our brains is to learn new things and to challenge ourselves. And I like to do that in a range of different ways. So not just using memory techniques, those as well, in terms of not just doing memory training, but also doing things that I like to learn, like different physical pursuits like rock climbing and yoga and taekwondo, and dancing, obviously, given that I'm an ex-dancer, but also then, some more what you'd think of as classic memorizing skills. Like I'm working on a dictionary. I really would like to know a dictionary word for word.
Right.
Um, because it enriches your life when you come across a word in a book and you can fully understand what the author was trying to get across there. That's a wonderful thing. um, and then obviously just trying to learn new things and do new things and experience new things. um, and then on top of that, there's all those other things that we can do to protect our brain, like do enough exercise generally, eat well, get enough sleep, drink enough water, don't drink alcohol too much, at least if you can help it. All those things that, overall are going to protect our health generally, which includes our brain and our memory.
Well, that's
Yeah.
great. I use the word holistic a lot myself, and I don't have as much flexibility as I think you do as a dancer, but certainly all those things contribute. Because one thing I've noticed is that pain gets in the way of paying
Mm.
attention,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
so
absolutely. Mm.
it just makes every sense to have the body involved.
Yeah, and I think,
Dictionaries. Oh, go ahead.
yeah. Well, I'm so sorry, but I think the other thing is that sort of, with physical exercise or learning something that has some challenges, sort of with either dexterity or they're not a little bit painful, but it's hard to push through. I think that sort of that discipline and focus that's sometimes needed with that is the same thing you need when you're trying to memorize something or learn something, and so they are complementary to each other.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great point, because so much of this does require a certain amount of not just discipline. I'd almost say it's specifically the discipline of consistency.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's fun, right? Um, it's not like it's as painful as, lifting heavy weights at the gym, because, you're playing with fun pictures. How bad can it be? Um, but it's the discipline of the consistency, as you say, like setting aside the time every day or every couple of days to do a little bit of exercising your memory. And kind of, I find with a lot of people that I coach, it's also just like celebrating the wins, in terms of, even if they're just doing 10 minutes 3 times a week, well, that's a lot better than they could be doing. And it's probably going to have a really a good effect over the long run as well anyway. So,
right.
so yeah, because I feel like sometimes if people feel like they've dropped the ball and they haven't done it for a few weeks, then it's like, it's like the diet. You have the big piece of chocolate cake and then you go, right, it's all done. I'm ruined. And really, if you put it in perspective, it's just a piece of chocolate cake.
Mm.
The
Yeah,
same
yeah.
with memory training, right? You go, oh, well, I haven't done any for 2 weeks. That's it. I'm feeling slow. Well, just do 10 minutes and tick that off and go, yeah, I did 10 minutes. Pat on the back, me.
Yeah, there seems to be a real all or nothing attitude that's not just specific to memory training, but just in a lot of learning in
Yeah.
general. Probably anywhere where there's sports or sorry, performance related
Mm.
outcomes, because you have just so many examples of the guitar player who's just up and down the fretboard, or
Yeah.
the person in martial arts like you flipping around and leg over the
That's
head,
correct.
all
Yeah,
this
like
stuff.
you say, it's about getting away from that expectation that you need to be the best. It
Mm,
it should be about you're living your best full life, and that doesn't mean you need to be the best at what you're doing, but rather that you're growing and learning and improving and feeling good about that.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that that's really an attitude that we all need to sort of, myself included. I'm always trying to encourage myself if I'm learning something new and I don't feel like I'm good at it because it's not my natural background or something.
Right,
Um, yeah, to just kind of go, well, no, you're actually here for the process. It's for the journey, not the destination, right?
right.
Um, mm.
So how does that all translate to a dictionary? Where do you even start with, speaking of all or nothing,
Hey,
where do you even start with a book that big and that nuanced? I mean, it's not like verbatim where you got some sort of poetic rhythmical
yeah,
sensibility or image sensibility that could help
yeah,
guide you
yeah.
along in terms of a plot or something.
Yeah, so I mean, just to put it all out there, it actually comes back to what we were saying, where as you would know, and as I'm sure a lot of your students know, um, it's actually not that hard using memory techniques to go, this is a word and this is its meaning, and I'm going to memorize it.
Right,
Awesome,
right.
woohoo! well, right. But then step two, and this is really the main step, is exactly what we were talking about before. It's about consistency. And it's about deciding A, I'm going to do this, and B, I need to set aside 20 minutes a day. And when I've completed it, that's when I've completed it, and um, not trying to rush that for some false sort of, oh, look, I did this in 1 year or something. It's like, no, I did this by doing it in 20 minutes a day for however long that takes.
Right.
Um, so for me, it's like I've had a little lesson here. I actually have to get into it and set aside the 20 minutes a day. But in terms of how I've started going about it and how I've worked out sort of seems to be the best way to go about it is there's obviously going to be a lot of memory palaces.
Mhm.
Lucky for me, I have from my past career lived all over the world. So that means that I was born in Adelaide. I'm going to start with A in a whole heap of places I know in Adelaide.
Mhm.
I'm going to know. I'm going to also learn, obviously, like the page number and the location, and that's more just for my own humour and because it's not that hard to add it once you're on track to do that. Um, I'm also putting in Anki. I don't know if how familiar everyone is with Anki, but it's just a flashcard repetition app that's
Right.
free. It's awesome because you can it depending on how easily you recall the information. I think we actually maybe even spoke about this last time, but as to when it shows you that information again. But the other thing I really worked out recently, which I was like, oh, and had a bit of an epiphany moment, is um, I find it's best to actually, rather than go, okay, in my 20 minutes today, I'm going to get through as many words as I can on this page. It's actually better to go, um, today, I'm just going to put all the words on this page and not their definitions in a palace.
Mhm.
And then if there's any leftover time, review some or go over, add some definitions from what you did yesterday the same way. And then the next day, then you put in the definitions. And the reason is because it's kind of like getting in that first scaffolding of information and then coming back to it somehow. That makes it stick more clearly for me than if I just try and do word definition, word definition, word definition.
Mm.
Yeah, so it's quite interesting. And the other thing that's really been like quite enjoyable about it, and I didn't anticipate this, um, is in the process of trying to look at the definitions, you actually get to understand the word on a much deeper level than you would have if you were just sort of looking up a word, you're reading your Kindle, oh, what does that word mean? Because you kind of have to break it down and you go, oh, I'm going to memorize, in the definition, you come across another word, you don't really know what it means. And you think, oh, or how it's pronounced. You think, oh, I better look that up first. So you end up down this, rabbit warren of going, oh, so how does a genus work? Because I didn't do a lot of year 12 science. So I
Right.
was like, oh, what is this thing called a genus? And so you do all this research, you actually end up with like learning all this other knowledge, which is sort of just by the way, because you're not just doing this just for a trick reason, but to actually sort of get the maximum learning out of it that you can as well, if that makes sense.
Oh,
Anyway,
it
sorry,
totally
I've been
makes sense.
wambling on. I'm excited about it, as you can tell.
I think it's a rare day that I don't go to Etym online, which is an etymological dictionary.
Etymology, yeah.
Yeah, and just
Yeah.
have a play with what words are and look at the dates
Mm,
and so forth.
mm,
It's super enriching, and
mm.
even without memorizing, it's just really
Yeah.
informing, and a lot of stuff sticks as a result. Um,
Yeah. And I kind of just, I mean, people are going, yeah, but why a dictionary? That's like a really big task. But I kind of was just thinking, because I mean, I'm not saying that I won't go and do memory competitions or anything again, because I very well might. But sort of on a like daily, yearly basis, I do some memory training to keep it sort of sharp, but it's more like I want to employ the techniques to actually enrich my life as well, not just, you know, not
oh
just
yeah,
get faster, you know. Um, so, I thought, well, I did actually start doing pi and thinking, oh, maybe I'll try and do the new record for pi. Da, da, da. But then I was sort of like, well, that's a little bit not useless, but it's just numbers, which anyone who knows how to do these techniques can do. And it's not really enriching anyone's life. Um,
yeah. I mean, it's a tough call. Everybody has their thing.
oh, yeah. And it'd be a sense of satisfaction to achieve that because yes, I did it.
Yeah, I think the
But
problem with with pies, it just never ends. So it's like it's.
Well, no, that's it. You can never get there.
But at least with the dictionary, you could say this is the dictionary,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
even if you don't do the whole thing, you've got like some number, right? Like I did 98%
yeah.
or what have you.
Well, I mean, you've got a number that enriches your life. Like you read a
Mm.
book and you come across a word, and whether you consciously or subconsciously point it out to yourself, you understood that page better and you got more from it. So,
So
yeah.
this idea of, doing a bit and then maybe adding definitions later,
Mm,
to me, that sounds like what we call it, the art of memory, where a painter often doesn't just, throw up
yeah,
the painting. They
absolutely.
have a
Mm.
foundation. They maybe put some black lines around there. Then they come in,
Yeah, yeah. And you
put the
come back, you
colors.
put more on. Yeah. And I mean, and that would be also obviously, and I'm sure you're the same. That's the way I would go about learning, some in-depth subject at uni or something. You'd start with all the main titles of the chapters of the book that you're covering this term, and then you'd slowly put more information there. And it sort of ends up being this little spiderweb or mind map of information at each location.
Mm.
But you don't do it all on day one, because otherwise it all gets muddled together in one big blob rather than having its own little pathway in that location.
Yeah, it's just definitely. I mean, the only things I've ever really memorized on day one would just be quotes, but
Mm.
that's technically not day one because I know known the language for a long time. you know.
I do quite a lot of public speaking. And
Mm,
so I often I'll spend substantially longer writing the script to speak than I will speaking it.
right.
Memorizing it rather, but I sort of will do the same thing as well. Is I'll write the script, and then day one I will break it into paragraphs, and then each key paragraph, highlight keywords, and on day one I'll just put those keywords in a palace and then sort of read it out a few times and see if I'm starting to get the gist of it with a natural feel. Because you're speaking, you don't want to really have an image for every single word.
Right.
And then you come back the next day and you give it a go and you're right, oh, I still don't like the way I'm saying that bit. And so then you go in and I say to some of my students, it's like editing the picture. You go, actually, I'm just going to add this little bit of detail here, and then I'm going to add this little side story, and
Right.
then slowly you get there, 2 days later, you've got it pretty much word for word without having so many images that it's robotic.
Right. Right. Yeah. I
Mm.
mean, my TEDx, I had some sentences. There's one that was like 17 words, and there were 3 images for it.
Yeah, yeah,
Uh,
exactly. Awesome.
but
Mm.
that said, I find it sometimes useful, like with Shakespeare. If there be nothing new but that which is have been before, how are our brains beguiled? Like, if there be that which is, like it's
Yeah, yeah.
I have images for there and that, and
Mm.
it's Thor, but
Mm.
Thor's doing something with his hair, Thor's doing
Yeah,
something with
yeah,
his
yeah.
hat. Do you ever do that if you really want to nail a word? Or
Like you have a code, basically. Is that what you mean?
pretty much, I mean,
Yeah, yeah,
there's an
absolutely.
image
Like
for
I
every
do that.
letter, and often for consonants.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So, depending on what it is, but like nearly if something's complicated, the first thing I always do is go, oh, if there's some sort of code here that's going to help me,
Mm,
and normally it's, some sort of image code that
right.
then that represents that information forevermore.
Mm,
And the nice thing about doing that, as I'm sure you found, is that then when you're learning something else that's completely not Shakespeare or something completely different, you can still use that code because it makes sense to you. You've made that association, so you can forevermore pull on that if you need it as a little image
right. Right.
or
Yeah.
a little
My code has nothing to do with Shakespeare. It just happens to be useful for
Yeah,
Shakespeare.
yeah.
Um,
Awesome.
so, do you ever get stage fright when you're going out and speaking?
Speaking. Well, not really, because I used to be a professional dancer.
Right.
So when I first started doing public speaking, I did it a little bit because obviously when you dance, there's no words. So there's a difference, now I have to use my voice. But then after, a couple of goes, I was like, oh, okay, this is a performance. Um, you have something you want to say to the audience and an idea how you'll connect with them. You plan it, you rehearse it a few times, and then you go and perform. And if something doesn't happen the way you anticipate it, you might have to improvise a little.
Right.
Um, and that's kind of fine too. And generally, people like people. So if you're just yourself and you stuff up something, it doesn't really matter anyway. That they're going to go, ah. that was really cute and funny the way she sort of giggled there and went, no, that's not what I meant.
Right, right. Yeah, we're about better memory, and we can always rely on a lot of people forgetting our transgressions.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and that's the thing, right? The thing is, the nice thing is that when you do forget, when you do have stage fright and you have that moment where you go, oh, hang on, what was I up to? Because I don't know about you, but when I learn something like a script using a memory palace, once it's in my memory, when I deliver that presentation or speech, I don't see the images to say the speech. I now know it, right? The
Yeah.
only time I go back to it is when I have that moment of blank and I go, oh, what's next? And that's when the performer in me comes out and sort of covers up for myself. While in your brain, you go, hang on, no, I've just been to the fridge in the memory palace. Now I'm up to the sink. And then you get back on track.
Mm.
So it's kind of like you know where you're up to, right? Without even following the palace.
Yeah, yeah. Oh yeah, it's useful to have that there. I mean, in the last talk I gave, people didn't laugh where they had laughed in the
But
dress
else,
rehearsal, and then they laughed at a different part where I wasn't expecting
yeah,
a laugh, and I was thank
yeah.
goodness the Mary Palace was there because it literally threw me.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. The same thing happened. Same thing happened in my TEDx where got some laughs where I didn't anticipate them, and at one stage, I demonstrated how to dance pi. Like
Right, right.
basically what goes on in my head to memorize 100 digits of pi, and so I dance. But the mic flew off
Right.
um, because obviously you're not supposed to be twirling around in bare feet while you're doing your TEDx. And there was a bit of like laughter, and I sort of swung it around my arm and caught it and kept going. But yeah, that definitely threw me. And so then at the end of it, I was like, right, where am I up to? Um,
Well,
yeah,
some people will be listening to this and they'll say, "Yeah, it's fine for you people. I mean, you're all relaxed. You maybe have some genetic predisposition or whatever it is." And
mm,
I often tell them about how uptight I used to be,
mm,
and
mm.
the time I went to the medical center to get a letter, so I didn't have to give a permission,
Yeah, yeah.
or sorry, I didn't have to give a presentation, and I was like
Mm.
shaking
Oh,
so bad.
yeah. No, I
Uh,
used to be the same in terms of for public speaking. So when I started public speaking, I didn't really start public speaking until I had memory techniques because I did my
right.
my first speaking gig about memory techniques. So yeah, no, I used to be exactly the same, like palm sweating,
Mm,
because it's just a completely different performance skill to dancing. But also just, I just didn't used to think that it's amazing how much confidence having memory techniques gives you, right? Like I used to feel like even if I prepared a lot, what if it goes wrong? Like maybe a little bit sort of, overthinker, a little bit anxious, a little bit unsure of my abilities. Um, and then, something like that would have really freaked me out because I, oh, and the work you'd put into something in order to deliver some sort of speech or even at a wedding or something for a friend, would be terrible because you just think you just have to go over and over with rote learning, and then when you discover how to actually use these techniques, you're like, oh my gosh, this is just like, it just feels like the biggest um, present or gift that, I can't believe I didn't know this earlier.
right, right.
Yeah.
Well, in terms of this live course that you're giving,
Mm,
I'm curious just about the event itself, but also
mm.
what do you just think about the state of education now? It seems so much is online, and what's the benefit you think of one versus the other, if there is any big distinction, or what's the call to
Online
doing it live?
versus in person.
Yeah,
Yeah. No, look, I think I definitely think there's the explosion in online information is also great. Like, it means that if someone is living somewhere rural or they can't get to the expert they want, or maybe they've got limited funds or, whatever it is, it's great that that information is everywhere available on the web. That's,
right.
fantastic. But I do feel like um, when you can connect directly with people either in person or over, Zoom even, there can be something special sometimes where you can really, um, you know, I think it's easier to sort of get a lot more out of it in terms of asking your specific questions and getting, the answer that you need to your individual issue. But also I'm actually keeping the workshops pretty small on purpose in terms of I'm quite limited in size. And that's because I want to be able to, actually sort of make sure that they're suited to the people that are in the room and what it is they need. So, so I'm basically going to hold them probably around once a month, but depending on demand. And just, even there might be some months where it's a specific topic. Like I get a lot of people asking me about how to memorize movement, obviously, as a dancer. But then there'll be people who are, they want it for work or they want it for university studies, or there's a particular area. So I think with that smaller size kind of workshop, there's that ability to be a little bit more hands-on. And I feel like for some people that can really help them overcome some hurdles. They might have some background in memory techniques. And, sometimes it's just like they've learned some really awesome things, but it's just like one little thing they're trying to, one little sort of thing in your mind that's stopping you getting it, but it seems like a big stone in front of you and you can't get around it. And then that little bit of hands-on help can make them go, oh, I get it. Right.
Yeah, I found that another thing that I just tell people all the time with my online course. I just say, just pretend like we're at a seminar and you're locked there with me. I know it's you got to pretend to do it, but there's so much benefit from, doing the exercise when the organizer or the teacher is walking around looking at all this, because you actually get it done. There's so much to mnemonics, as we've been talking about, is like having your code so that you actually have images that you actually can use when it comes time to use them. And if you don't at some point put down the borders and the time and actually pen to paper or whatever to work it out, then it never happens.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. And so I think that's a really good point. And it, and that it sort of comes back to the consistency thing that we spoke about as well, where I'm sort of hoping that there'll be some people in Brisbane who go, yeah, I can commit to going, I'll try out this first one, but I can commit to going once a month, and then I can put into practice and ask some questions about some of the memory training they've either done before, or if they haven't done any, get their heads around how to get started, or so I it's sort of like a little bit of a trial, see how we go, because it's really all been online before now. But I know from training dancers, which I've trained dancers both online and in studios, obviously, I know training dancers, it's there's a different quality to being actually like physically with a group of people, I think. But both are valuable, obviously.
Right. What do you think when we talk about training, the actual steps that you have to take, which, as we've mentioned, a lot of it has to do with having a code that is quite instantaneous. What do you think? I don't know if you get the same questions that I get, but all the time people are asking me, is it okay to use ChatGPT and that sort of thing? And do you have any thoughts or preferences or suggestions?
For what? For the code, or what are they using ChatGPT for? For the knowledge gathering, or?
I've seen them have that they ask it to generate a memory palace. So the image ones will make some sort of city in a glass ball or something that they can project onto, or it will be, mnemonic examples, or it will be image examples. And I played around with it too quite a few times. And it is kind of cool. My 36 is Mike Tyson for like boxing match.
Right.
And 99 is the Pope. And it's really kind of cool to see Michael Jackson punching the Pope, to have 3699. So it's,
right.
I get it. But at the same time, it seems to me a little bit like training the opposite of the skill that you want, which is, just to do it.
I kind of feel like, I think that there could be use for it in, and when I say limited, I don't mean that means it's all bad. But, I can see how there could be a limited use for it. But I think generally for me and for the students that I train, I try to encourage them to, really it would be for numbers. And it's interesting that you use numbers, because numbers, I think, and potentially other things too, I'm just thinking about it. really the quality of how quickly you can use a code is how much you can visualize it. So sometimes when I have a particular number that's causing me grief, and I often go, oh, what's this one again? That's when I'll Google and try and find images of that as closely match what it is
Mm.
that I'm normally trying to see in my head, so that it's more easy to then see it in a quicker time. So I can see a use for it there, definitely. But for things like a memory palace, I don't know. I know that with playing with computer games, that's kind of works for people, some of my students, because they create the palace. So they're actually going through a creative process to, build the pathway and what it looks like. Um, but if it was built for you, I mean, I suppose if you're walking through it, it's just like visiting a new place, though. But I don't know. Maybe I'm old school, but I'd be more tempted to go if I've got something important I want to memorize. I'd be more tempted to take my iPhone, go down to the local art gallery, and film walking through it, and then
Mm.
go home and sort of look at that in some detail and go, oh, okay. So because if you just kind of rely on your memory and go to the art gallery, you might come away with like 20 locations in a palace. But if you actually film it and then come home and build the memory palace, you could come away with hundreds, right? Because you can go back over it and go, oh, actually, there's a little ledge there, and there's a little, gargoyle, and so you can sort of reinforce those other parts that you saw on the day, but didn't quite pay attention to. And so
Yeah.
I'd be more tempted to do the old school version for a memory palace. Um, but yeah, I don't think there's any hard set rules with these techniques. I think that I've seen people play with them in so many different ways now and use them to learn so many different things that it's a mistake to say, no, no, you don't do it like that.
Right. Right.
I think, if something's working for someone, then that's great. Um, yeah.
Mm. Yeah, I would agree. My only thing is I'd say there is one hard set rule, which is it either works or it doesn't. And so there's
Hmm.
like the rule of radical honesty. And
Yeah, does it work?
uh,
Absolutely.
sort of the difference
And sometimes
between
it's hard, right? To be honest to yourself and go, actually, this doesn't work as well as that.
that's right. It is hard to be radically honest to oneself above all. Um, Speaking of art, this might interest you since you mentioned art galleries. About 6 weeks ago, Duke University released a study, and long story short, I mean, everybody should read it themselves, but basically the idea is that they have a test group go into a art gallery. Half of them are told to just go in the art gallery, have a look around. The other half are told, pretend that you're art thieves planning a heist. And the art thieves planning a heist scored, off the
Oh,
charts
yeah.
on what they
Mm.
remembered about what paintings were in
Mm,
there,
mm.
where they were, even
But
the
there's an
names of the
intention
paintings.
maybe and a focus,
Mhm.
or
Yeah.
yeah.
Do you
Was that did
use
they come to did they come to a conclusion with this study? Like, was it the intention and focus, or was it just sort of left?
the specific study, as I recall it, was about the use of a mental metaphor to
Mm,
create better outcomes in terms of memory. Uh,
mm.
and to me, I just said, yeah, of course, the ancient Greeks were using the gods as mental metaphors
Yeah,
to create
yeah,
better outcomes all the time,
yeah.
etc. But I use it as a kind of like a segue, just jumping off your
Mm.
art gallery example, but also a question I had in mind for you, which is just, what maybe lesser known cognitive strategies like a mental metaphor or whatnot do you use or that you're aware of that has helped other people that maybe should be more popular, such as something as simple as pretending you're an art thief to remember more?
That's an interesting question. Uh, hmm. Yeah, I think it's actually it's sort of similar to what you're talking about, where obviously group one had no intention, no focus, and group two had a focus and an intention. And so um, sometimes when some of my students who are, especially if they're remembering a lot of complex text, so like an example would be someone studying tort law,
Right.
and they've got to know, or trying to go for the bar exam or whatever. Um, and because it all gets a bit like it's all very, legal terminology and all a bit like blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, I'm so apologize if there's any lawyers out there going, it's very interesting. But I mean, like, the terminology is all very similar and it's very dry. Um, and so, at first I kind of started off just making sure that when it wasn't sticking, that their memory palaces were exciting enough, which is, all pretty standard stuff so far. Like it's not on the same heights and it's not the same, you know, you're not seeing it all at eye height. You're using the location, so it's actually sort of interacting with the location, all that sort of stuff. And then I kind of worked out that sometimes it's because they're seeing it all in the same way. Like, it's always them looking at something front on, um, or they're always seeing it just from above, or it's always the same size. And so when I started noticing that, then I sort of said, oh, make sure, you're mixing it up like you're making a film. You're the art director and you want to make sure that's not a boring film. It's like this really crazy art house film. And, sometimes you're going to zoom right in on the thing. And
Mm.
other times you're going to like be panning across. And other times, you might hear, like the right sort of music or like, you know, um, so we started to sort of play with that. Um, and then the other thing I found to sort of make boring information really, I'm sorry, I said it again with law information, but dry information more exciting is to actually, yeah, pretend you're sort of viewing it through a different lens. So you can change the feel of it. So you can either say, while you're describing these pictures and you're making these stories, you're going to pretend that you're a professor describing it to a student, or okay, now you're going to like you're going to picture it like you know, you're like this mad genius who everyone thinks is incredible, and now or you're well known for your mad abstract art, and everyone's going to come and view this palace and see what you've done, and just by putting a different intention or a different focus on it, it can really mix things up. And I find that that's particularly useful if something is dry. Like normally we don't need it. If it's poetry or something lively, um, it's not necessary. But if it's yeah, the more dry it is, the more you're going to have to really get creative with it. And sometimes that can be hard, uh, either for the person who might not have played with it much before, or just to get those creative juices going, or maybe it's just because the information is just so dry. It's same thing. Does
Right, right.
that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, it totally makes sense. I mean, I'm
Mm.
glad you mentioned that because you mentioned music, the having the right music in there, and I think I don't know where it comes from, and I'm totally very bad at it, but I've tried to improve it because we always say it's pictures and seeing visualization and all that sort of stuff. But we know that some people don't visualize at all in terms of seeing images,
Yeah.
and yet they're
Mm.
perfectly capable of doing
Mm.
well at competition. Lynn Kelly, for example, and
Mm.
so yeah, like it almost
It's all the senses, right?
yeah, yeah,
Because, you can also teach someone who's never seen to use these techniques,
right.
because you can say, what does it smell like? What does it feel like? What would happen if you stuck out your tongue and licked the image? What does it feel like? Is it rough, smooth, hairy?
Mm.
Um, so we have all these other senses, and um, I think that when it still comes back to the intention, though, when you just put a different lens on the whole picture, you can change it completely. And that's kind of like if anyone's ever played with, Instagram stories or Adobe, or they've done any editing, you can change one little thing and the whole picture's got a different feel.
Right.
It's got a different emotion to it, or it makes you feel completely differently. So if something's not sticking, you know, mix up one of the Adobe colors, just play with it a little bit.
When you go to compete, do you have a strategy in place where you make sure to tick certain boxes that the associations are strong enough that you have that confidence that you can go and do the recall round?
Yeah, so for memory competitions, I'll always use my favorite memory palaces.
Hmm.
Um, and when you analyze why is a memory palace favorite or not, there's a few recurring themes, which is sort of what we're talking about in terms of the locations are diverse, they're interesting, they're different heights, they're different angles, they're different feelings, and often there's a good connection to the place. Like for a really tip-top memory palace, you've got a lot of emotions that you might have experienced there,
Mm.
um, so that you can sort of use that to interact with what you're placing there. Like, oh my gosh, my mum wouldn't want me to do that there, because it's your childhood home, and so you're going to remember that better because she wouldn't approve of that, or she would laugh at that, or so where you have emotions is good. So for a competition, I would always choose like my very best memory palaces. But actually for competitions, my strategy is a little bit different, and it kind of comes from that, like way back when I didn't feel like I had a good memory and I sort of wasn't confident in my abilities to learn or anything like that, which is not getting freaked out by the occasion. And so the way to do that is you train exactly the way the competition is going to be. So that when you're there, if you put on your noise cancelling headphones and your big hat with your horse-like side blinders, which I actually have, you can basically just in your brain go, right, I'm sitting at my desk and it's about to begin. And this is just like I've done every other day for the last 2 months. And I know what my scores are, and they're within a bell curve, and they'll be from here to here, and all of that's fine. And I'm just going to do my best, and that's where I am at home at my desk. You can sort of trick yourself into being in not a stressful location. That's, as you and I know, stress can really affect your performance
Yeah,
with memory. So, yeah.
So when you were coming up and dealing with your memory to the point that you went into competition and did so well, who were some of the mentors, guiding lights, or books that you learned the most from and inspired you?
So I was inspired by first of all, I just found memory sport through Moonwalking with Einstein by
Mm.
Joshua Fowler. So it's just a fun, it's a great book. And it covers memory sports. Obviously, he's a journalist and he was covering memory competitions. Um, so I basically just took his book, and he talks about a lot of different memory athletes. And from there, I researched those athletes. So I
Right.
went and I found their sites and I read their blogs. And if they have videos, I watched their videos. And then fairly quickly, I started to kind of, um, try out the techniques, and then sort of experimented with the techniques myself and watched what happened with my scores if I tried different things. So sort of like playing with what they said, but then adding my own flair to it as well, which is the great thing about memory techniques, that you can actually sort of, experiment a little. It doesn't have to be, as you say, just as long as it works. It doesn't have to be exactly the same as what everyone else uses. So I know my numbers, the way I remember numbers is quite different to, I mean, there's similarities, but it's a little bit different to the way that most memory athletes go about it. And I kind of did that by accident because I had misunderstood what I read, and I was like, oh, it must be like this. So then I made this, this new little system, and then also I added dance actions.
Right.
Um, so, but yeah, so it was a really wide range of athletes, really, but they were kind of, I just stuck to, because I didn't want to get lost, following down the path of someone who's just trying to sell me some supplement that doesn't work. I really just stuck to the people he mentioned in the book.
Right.
Um, and yeah, went from there. And I think the nice thing is that I think, um, improving your memory and working on your memory draws a group of people that, on the whole, are very sort of a very like-minded and sharing, caring community. So, I've learned a lot from, a lot of different, not only memory athletes, but memory experts who use these same techniques and mnemonics in order to improve their own lives and that of others. So,
Mm.
yeah, kind of just spread from there.
Well, speaking about supplements, there's certainly a lot of skepticism out there, and people who are selling them are part of the reason why people get skeptical,
Mm,
especially when they do it off the back end of a memory book or a memory course.
yeah, yeah,
And there's also just like health issues that,
yeah.
recommending something where somebody's got whatever other pills they're already taking, getting into
I mean,
risk.
that's
But
not to say there's not things that are good for us. Like,
yeah.
blueberries are good for us and our brain, and walnuts, and like if you follow through the science, there's foods and things that are good for us and things that aren't. Um, and some of them might, have start to delve slightly into the supplement kind of area. But yeah, I just feel like the focus when it's focused on a pill is in the wrong place, because it's like, um, it's like not eating healthily, and then when you have a health issue, then the doctor prescribes you with some drugs to fix it. I kind of feel like, there's things that you can do for your memory that are not,
Mm,
they're more holistic.
right.
It's all the other things that we're talking about.
Yeah, and of course, a pill is not going to teach you mnemonics in terms of having
Mm,
some sort of strategic, this is the incoming information, it's spelt like this, or these are the
mm,
numbers, and now I'm going to attach this on there. But one of the things, or why I'm going in this realm is, what
mm.
do you tell people who are skeptical? I mean, I come up with these little phrases like, there's more science than anyone has time to read,
Yeah,
decades of memory competition records,
yeah,
and thousands of years of tradition. Like, how are you going to fly in the face of all this?
yeah, yeah.
Do you have either a polished stock response, or any
Right. Look,
any
there's
heart advice to give to people who
there,
are
there's
still, I
no
do not believe?
there's no doc standard answer that I would normally give, except for um just try out one of the simple, try out a simple memory palace with a shopping list.
Mm.
And if that works for you, then consider opening your mind to the idea that could that be extended so that you can learn some really awesome things really quickly. And that, so, really, because for me, when I was reading this book as well, it's so well written that I was like convinced this was real. But then I was sort of like, yeah, but this can't be real because I've always had a bad memory and I couldn't do that. And I was like, well, maybe I can, let me see. And so just basically just give it a go. Like, what can you lose? 20 minutes of your time versus it might change your whole freaking life. Like the amount of people who have been skeptical and then I go, oh, just do how many items do you reckon you can normally remember to take to the supermarket without having a problem?
Mm.
Okay. Do you have 10 minutes for me? Let's try something, you know. So yeah, there's always, I think, until memory techniques are mainstream and until they're used in schools and taught where they should be. There should be, it should be that in prep, you start at school and you spend an hour a week learning some basic memory techniques. And by the time you get to year 4, someone can put 40 digits in front of you and you can read them and read them backwards. And it's not a big deal. Everyone in the class can do it. That would be awesome, right? Because then for the rest of those people's lives, they wouldn't forget the date that they learned that this happened or the percentage that they need to say in a presentation or the street number of their mate's house. You know, they just use it naturally, like how we use language.
Right, right.
And that's just numbers, obviously. There's all the other techniques as well. But yeah.
In your own practice, does it ever get old or tedious, or the magic feeling ever rub off, or are you continually amazed when you just recall this stuff and go, oh my goodness?
Definitely go through phases where I'm like, I'm not as into it, like as in, I never go, oh, I'm over this. I'm never using it again. I never would say that because it's completely life changing. And I know there will be times in my life where I need to do a presentation or stand up at my son's wedding and give a speech or, learn something I want to or whatever.
Mm.
And given that I'm a little bit of a serial learner these days, I might get tired of it in terms of um, just purely training to try and get faster, but I'll never not be kind of using it somewhere on a at least several times a week. You're going, oh well, I want to learn this or I need to know that. And so, and I think the real trick is getting training to a point where it becomes so second nature that even if you don't do memory training for a while, you are actually still applying it all the time without realizing it because you met someone called Katie. And so you apply the techniques to remember her name's Katie, but you don't even know you're kind of doing it anymore. It's just become part of who you are and how you learn.
Yeah. That's a good place to be.
Hmm.
Okay, I got one more sort of technical mnemonic question for you before we go, but I would just love to hear more about the course. When is it taking place? How do people find out about it?
Yep.
And just generally, because I know you have other things for people who can't be in Brisbane, next week.
Yeah,
But just what about
absolutely.
details about the event and where to find
Yeah.
the registration?
So it's on Friday the 24th of November, so it's Friday week. Um, and it's from 10 to 12, held in Ashgrove, so pretty close to Brisbane. There are limited numbers, so there's still some spots left, but it's starting to fill up. And we'll be covering sort of a range of different memory training techniques, like, remembering names and texts and facts and things like that, but also a little bit of practical, how you can keep training on your own. And obviously there'll be a chance for questions and answers and things like that. If someone has a specific, I really need to know this at work, and how could I apply that to this? Or um, so and depending on demand, I'll hold these once a month. On my website, there's a blog that I put out with a link where you can read more about it and book. I don't know if you have the ability to share that, Anthony, or what have you, but otherwise you can just find it on anastasiawoolmer.com and go to the blog.
Yep.
Yeah, and otherwise I also have online resources and coaching too. Especially, if anyone has something that's a little bit sort of movement based, or something that might be left of field. I'm sort of that left of field girl as well.
Excellent. And yeah, a lot of people ask me about movement, and I send them your interview that's already there.
Yeah,
And
they email me, they let me know.
very good.
They're
Very good.
always very nice to you.
But in terms of this technical thing, I want to come back to this dictionary thing, and you mentioning adding numbers after the fact. And
Mm.
I have a very keen interest in this in particular, not only for how you would actually go about that, but it also has application for mem deck work, which I do,
Mhm.
which is knowing a deck that you keep in so-called stay stack,
Yep.
and then knowing the number of every card. And I recently got back into it, and for whatever reason, there's a little bit of resistance that never used to be there in
Mm.
terms of establishing the exact number of the card. So I've got the deck. That's no problem. In fact, I'm quite pleased by how I can memorize the deck much faster than I used to be able to. But in terms of adding the number, I don't quite know why there's this push. Like it just should be so obvious to just add this number. And in some cases, it sticks better than others. But what would you do either with the dictionary and you're going to add the page number, or anything, a number that you're going to add a number to, or a number that you're going to add a symbol to, or a symbol that you're going to add a number to, or maybe you have a Bible verse and you never had the number and now you're going to add it. Like,
yeah, sure.
So what's your thoughts
Yeah,
on procedure, like literally step 1, step 2?
yeah. So, so when you've got this deck down pat, and you know it, inside out, and it's just adding the number. Um, you know, Basically, when you review these cards, and you've added the numbers, the way I would do it would be, I'd have this little image or this little story that represented the information on that card. Now I'm adding the number, so I would go, here's my story. I know that story, and then here's my number. The number would then need to basically make like a little edit to the story. So you go, this is what was originally happening. And now it's kind of like an alternate universe. Let's say, let's skip. Why don't you give me one card, little, like, what is the story for what you see?
Okay. I think actually just talking to you, I've realized why that it's a little difficult, because I memorized this a little bit differently. But I'm sure we got the Queen of Hearts here on the top. And so what I've done, if we just think of my memory palace here, is I actually do it in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, throughout the whole memory palace, except for one little area where I, messed up the system a little bit because of a doorway. But anyway, the whole idea is that, so Queen of Hearts is bone because of the number that I have assigned to it, and then we should have two of spades here. Yeah, two of spades, and so on. So the bone is going to do something to Tintin, which is what that is. So now I don't really have to add 1 and 2 to these because they're at the beginning of the deck. But let's say 52 is 9 of clubs, and below that is what I mentioned before, Mike Tyson 6 of diamonds, because that's 36. So 51 and 52. That's also not that difficult, but I'm not sure what 22 is. That's part of the problem is, but let's say, okay, so 26 is Queen of Diamonds. So let's just go with that. Oh, sorry, King of Diamonds, and 27 is Queen of Diamonds. So those two interacting. 27 is Nick Nolte, but I add that to the image, and I guess that's part of the issue, is that there is no story that connects them. It's the pairs, right? So Queen of Hearts is doing something to Tintin. So that's got to be, because bone is what Queen of Hearts is. And it's the bone from, sometimes I can't even remember the Space Odyssey 2001, you know, those apes with the bone. And so she's doing something with a bone to Tintin. So that gets that. Then I move down to the next thing. So it's like, it's so many stories that's probably it's partly the construction, which you mentioned before. Like, look at how the memory palace is constructed.
Yeah.
And then part of it has to do with that it's already story that, because they're bound, that's probably part of why the individual number is.
Can I just clarify something? So Anthony, what you're trying to learn is every possible 2-digit combination you'll see, correct?
No, it's just where
every
in the
possible
stack,
2 card.
Every card is, well, almost every card, because there's an irregularity around the 30th card in the stack because of how that I changed that pattern, because there was a doorway. So I couldn't have 1, 2, 3, 4. I guess I could have, but the doorways just sort of threw me because I didn't anticipate that was going to be trouble, because I'd never used that memory palace before for anything, let alone this particular work. Now I could transport this to a different memory palace, but that I don't think is the big issue with the numbers. Really what I find, I'm just wondering if I'm getting old or something, but for whatever reason, like, these numbers just do not want to stick in place. But I think it probably has to do with that I have to have 2 images per every 2, because there is no 1 card per station. It's always 2 cards.
It's always 2 cards, right? Yeah. And it feels like maybe that memory palace is like, sometimes when a memory palace is too almost too ordered. Do you know what I mean? Like,
it is, because basically the way this is the gift of this kind of memory palace, but it's also its weakness, because the way I like to do it now, almost for everything, is corner wall, and then some sort of threes. But then you get to doorways, and then you're like, I'm going to use the doorway anyway, right? And then the doorway in this particular house, it goes in a hallway that's actually quite long, and then there's stairs. So I've actually got at one point 8 of spades and 5 of hearts together on the staircase, and then down is 2 of clubs and 2 of hearts, and then over in the corner is Queen of clubs and 9 dimes. Anyway, 9 dimes. That's right. But anyway, it gets a little boring to hear these cards without some magic trick going on. But anyway, like, it just has these irregularities where what would have been better is just to have room instead of room, and then hallway, and that would probably solve a lot. Or I have to do like the 5th station golden hand thing and do math. But when you're doing the magic trick, because I've done this before with a different, this is actually what's called the Redford stack, and the reason why it's in the memory palace is because I always just use R&R, so Rick's house, which is good, and because it saves time on thinking. But the Tamira's stack is in a different memory palace. Anyway, I'm just trying different things. But when you're doing this magic trick, you don't want to look like you're calculating in your head, right? You just need to know. But I think also, I mean, I'm not too proud to admit, like, I'm a lot older now than when I first was a magic performer, so that could be part of it. But I think probably if I try this in a different memory palace, that might. So thank you.
Do you think that it might also have something to do with because, and this is something that you were talking about, and then I know we have to finish, but you were talking about a little bit before, you said, do you ever get bored with doing it? And I think that for people who use these techniques a lot, like we do, there is a risk, not that you get bored, but that because it's not fresh and new and exciting and like, wow, I almost feel like we need to make it, you probably need to put the lens on. You probably need to go, I'm going to make these stories really crazy. Like make them different from each other because there's so many and it's sort of repeating and like,
Yeah.
I don't know. I reckon maybe you should just play with like trying to pretend you're a kid and it's like Christmas and you've never seen this before and these memory techniques and you're just going to go wild.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, yeah.
That's good advice. Yeah. And I would imagine that it might be easier with dictionary page numbers because these are words and now you're adding a number as opposed to, or
Well, and there's
what do
not
you
many
anticipate?
numbers. Yeah,
Yeah.
there's not many numbers too. So you sort of, um, like if you think I'm putting words in a room and that's page 2 of B.
Mm.
So basically, if I was on page 2 of B, I would be let's say Brisbane. It starts with B. And page 2, my number 2 on its own is a swan, right? So I would make some ludicrous image at the start of that memory palace that I chose for page 2. And it's like it's flapping its wings and it's blocking the entrance. And that's how I know, it's the top of page 2 on the left-hand side. And then when I get to the right-hand side of the top of page 2, there's just 2 swans blocking the way. They're just
Right.
like fighting over each other so that you can't keep going through the palace. And that's how I know I'm up to the right hand side. If you want to know, is it, the 5th entry down on the 6th? Well, because there actually doesn't tend to be that many entries per half side because of the definition. So you can pretty easily do that math without even looking like you're working it out. You're just going, oh, that's the 6th entry down because you can see how many locations there are between the swan and the 2 swans. So
Right.
I think in my instance, it's not quite so repetitive because it's really only um, 2 numbers that I'm putting every sort of, that would be for 16 words or something. Um,
But you're not going to wind up with lots of swans on every page, or am I misunderstanding how the swans are working?
so then you're in B, page 3, right?
Right.
So then you've got an apple, a massive apple, and obviously, my first word would interact with that image, like, whatever that first word is, it's taking a bite of the apple. And then, so you don't get confused because, um, like, if it's B, starting with a B, you're in Brisbane, right? And then you want to go to page 2. Well, you go to the Memory Palace where there's the big swan blocking the entrance.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? So you don't get confused.
I guess I do. I'm just maybe I'm overthinking it, but when I think of B is not going to be on page 2. B is going to be on like page 50 or something. So I'm trying to
Oh,
get
no,
where.
yeah, no, I'm so sorry. Yeah, I'm being dumb. I'm just kind of going. I'm just starting it back at the beginning. But of course, it'll be like page 22. So
Right.
a snake.
Okay.
Um, yeah. So I'm so sorry. Yeah, of course that was dumb. Otherwise, if I started at A, it would have been okay. But I can't start at A because my number 1's a little bit rude. So that's why I started B. But
Got it.
yeah.
This is maybe part of the reason why sometimes people get discouraged when they're learning memory techniques because they're like swans, snakes.
Oh no,
Michael
absolutely. And
Mike
that's
Tyson.
seriously why I always just go to people, let's let's just start with something really simple. And then they go, oh, I see how this works now. And then they go, oh, what about if I learned something like this? And then you just slowly, it's something you've got to learn. Like these skills are, they're easy to attain in terms of to get the basics going and to use quite well for a lot of things. But in order to actually be able to use them across a range of your whole life, you actually need to become like a practitioner, like really learn how to use them and practice them. Like if it was really easy, then absolutely everyone would know how to do it. They would watch one YouTube video and then that's it. They're an expert. They can memorize anything.
Mm.
You have to learn all the intricacies, and you've got to start somewhere and find someone to guide you through it so that you can get to the point where you're like, well, I can memorize this or this or this, and you know how to do it. You know how to adapt it. Yeah, which is why, as you say, if you come into the middle of something like this, you'd go, what on earth are these people talking about?
But the beautiful thing is that people have memorized dictionaries before, and Ed Cook, who's mentioned in Moonwalking with Einstein that you mentioned, there's a video with him talking to Dr. Yip, and I don't remember the ins and outs of it, but I think he pretty much says, "Hey, what's on page 500 of this dictionary?" And
Yeah, yeah.
they just open it up, and Dr. Yip's not looking, and he just starts to recite what's on the page, or
Well, and
some
it's not that
variation
hard,
of that.
right? Yeah, because you
Yeah.
just go to your, I mean, it's not that hard because you just, once you have a number system, you go, well, 500, it's a cuttlefish. Where's my cuttlefish? It's at that memory palace, and bam, you're there. You know what
Mm.
letter it is, what word it is, you know.
I guess a
Mm,
huge part of the challenge is just simply what we talked about already, is that you got to build your own system, because if you say 500 for cuttlefish, I'm just like, huh, what? Like I would use lasso from Wonder Woman or something, for LSS or something, for,
right.
whatever. Cause I'm like bound to the major,
Yeah, yeah.
for whatever
I
reason.
teach the major system too. It's very easy to, I mean, it's a great way to get a number system, and absolutely.
Well, I hope, if nothing else, our excitement and enthusiasm for noodling on these, let's say, issues, has expressed just how much it has changed our lives. So
Hmm.
thank you so much for favoring me to go through a little memory project I'm working on, and for favoring all of us, and for letting us know about your upcoming event, and all these tidbits and tips and tricks from your experience.
Not at all, Anthony. It's always a pleasure to talk to you, and you're a wealth of knowledge yourself, regardless of what you say about your age.
Well, I'm not getting that old, but it is something I think about a lot, and I like to
Mm.
track the experience of aging and just call a spade a
Mm.
spade.
Yeah, that's it. I
Um,
mean, and it's about making it better at whatever stage you're in, right? Like,
right.
you know, if that'll be the case, I'm sure with both of us when we're 90, we'll still be trying to be the fittest brain version of a 90-year-old that we can be.
Well, if there's one thing I observed, Harry Lorraine was basically up till the end sharing his magic and his memory.
Mm.
Tony Buzan was never happier than, the last time I saw him, which wasn't that far from when he went to the Great Memory Palace in the Sky. So I think there's a lot to getting these techniques ASAP, so that you can age with them
Mm.
and enjoy the experience of what memory really is, insofar
Mm.
as anyone could ever come to define it, but
Mm.
we can certainly have a closer relationship to it. It may be why
Mm.
the Greeks had a name for memory, which was Mnemosyne, the great
Mm.
goddess. And that would be a mental metaphor, we could all enjoy adopting.
Mm.
It is,
Absolutely.
it is divine, I think, in many ways.
Mm. Thanks so much for having me.
Well, thank you. And I hope to talk again soon. Well, I want to thank Anastasia again, and just a little bit more about the problem I was having that we were talking about at the end of this interview and how I'm solving it. Let me just reiterate from my introduction that there's so much value in being able to speak with someone else who understands mnemonics. If you're in the Brisbane area, make sure to take the chance to learn with Anastasia live, or just go to her site, anastasiawoolmer.com, for other training options. Now, in terms of my MemDeck work, which is Memorize Deck, I didn't completely frame the trouble I was having in this interview, but for those of you who are working on similar things, maybe you're doing it to have an advantage in card games, or you're also doing magical performance with card magic. Another reason for the border blur that I was having has to do with, first of all, I used to do this, and I used to memorize the deck on a station by station basis. So it was a little easier to work with the numbers in that way. But memorizing in pairs already starts to blur the images together. But the other issue really that I was having is that I was using the same system twice. So what that means basically is that every card has a number. The Queen of Spades, for example, is 22 in the system that I use to create my images for the cards. And that image for 22 is Rowan Atkinson dressed as a nun, the guy who played Mr. Bean. And he's a nun because 2 in the major system is N. And so N and N, 22, makes the word nun. So the way that this gets a little bit tricky is because Queen of Spades in the Redford stack that I'm learning routines with now, I used to use the Tamari stack, the Queen of Spades is at position 14. So there's the image of Rowan Atkinson as a nun at position 14. And then there's another image for 14. But Jack of Spades is at position 22 in the stack. And so I was adding another none. And this is why I was starting to get really confused with myself, because I'd be like, hang on, I'd be at position 14. And I'm like, is that Jack of Spades or Queen of Spades? And then I'd be at position 22 and it'd be the same problem. Now, in memory science, there's an issue. It's called the ugly sister effect. So if you can imagine Prince Charming trying to get Cinderella to come to the door, the ugly sisters want Prince Charming, and they keep pushing themselves instead of Cinderella into his line of sight. And so he keeps choosing, the wrong person. And that's part of what this issue is. But I was self-creating it. Sometimes in the memory world, we call this border blur or ghosting. And, you might know what's supposed to be there, but you get confused because there's this ghost haunting the station in the memory palace. And I was doing it to myself because I'm using the same system twice. And also in this memory palace, as I was telling Anastasia, there's a discrepancy where I break the pattern. Normally I have 2 cards per station. And then at one point, at the 27th position, I have 3 cards that are just 1 card per station. And so that was a little bit of an issue. Anyway, since swans came up in our conversation, what I did is, one of the most obvious things, but I couldn't see it without speaking with somebody else, and I just used a different number system. So one of those number systems is something that I know very well, but I didn't think to use it, and I teach it in this book, Mystery of the Magnetic Numbers. And it's just very simply having very simple shapes for the digits 0 to 9, and then if you wanted to have 22, well then you can have 2 swans. Or if it's 21, you can have a swan with a candle. Or if it's 20, a swan with a donut. And so this really solved everything. Even though there's a lot of swans, those swans are always different, because if it's 42, then it's a sailboat with a swan, and now the swan is in a different order. It's not at the front of the 2-digit number, it's at the back. So anyway, it's just, it's not exactly a magic bean, but it's a much more direct way of not having the border blur. And so this secondary system is very, very powerful. And again, I'm telling you all this to stress and to help you understand that you cannot underestimate the value, even as a more intermediate or advanced user of mnemonics, in explaining what you're trying to do to a fellow memory expert, or if you're a beginner, being able to learn in their company and just ask questions, explain how you're doing what you're doing, and getting that valuable insight from someone who's further ahead, and in Anastasia's case, much further ahead. So if you're stuck, please stop struggling on your own. You can make progress, and people like Anastasia are here to help. Thanks as always for joining me on the Magnetic Memory Method podcast. Until we have a chance to speak again, thanks for all your thumbs up, thanks for being subscribed, and until we have a chance to speak again, keep yourself magnetic.